can I welcome you all to DCA, especially the general public. Obviously, it's the last committee that we have of the year, just before Christmas. I'm sure all members will treat it there, and they're probably a bit demob happy, of course. For the public, can I just say we have 3 simple rules. Firstly, if you have a mobile, please switch off. Secondly, if you need to use the toilets, they're either side of the main entrance there. Thirdly, no fire alarm is planned, so if it goes off, it should be correct, in which case we go out via the main door, turn right down the ramp and assemble by the piazza by Bristol Cathedral. Can I just say to members, obviously, we've got 2 items on our agenda this evening to determine, which is quite a lot less than previously. No doubt I can depend on members' usual forensic examination, but that's no excuse for excessive jaw. We do leave that to DCB, not DCA, of course. So can I move to item 2, apologies? Well, I notice we haven't got Farah Hussein yet, but I spoke to her late this afternoon, and I believe she should be here, so hopefully she'll be here before the first item. No substitutions. Are there any declarations of interest, please? John?
Yeah, it's just to point out that agenda item 1 for the Kings of Weston Island Bridge is in my ward, and I've actively worked with campaigners for the reopening and restoration of the bridge, but I come here without a decision in mind, and many queries as well, which I will raise at the appropriate time.
Thank you. 4 minutes of the last meeting. These have been circulated. I believe they're correct. Can I propose them? Do I have a seconder? Andrew, thank you. Action sheet number 5. The only issue I want to mention is the last one about Causton Court we considered last month. We had a draft construction management plan template which went back to the case officer on Tuesday, just before the publication of these papers. So we had a chance to be consulted. That's gone back with a number of comments, but we're broadly in favour of that. Then 6 appeals, Gary.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Unless members had any questions about any of the items, I don't have anything further to add on this occasion.
It appears not. 7, enforcement, Gary.
Thank you, Chair. Just noting that there's 2 notices served since the last time the committee met, both.
We now move to public, sorry, Phil Burr.
Just a question about the enforcement. Really good to see them there, thank you. What will happen to those people who have not done as they should have done?
So with any enforcement notice, they take 28 days before they come into effect. So there's a 28-day window for those who receive a notice to appeal, and that's often what happens because it's just the trend really to challenge the enforcement notice on a number of grounds. So I'm not sure exactly whether that's happened with either or both of these. If they have been appealed against, obviously that you'll then see the appeals listed on the appeals paper, and we'll update you on the progress with that. So that would then go to planning inspector to decide whether or not the notice stands or not. And so if the notice does stand either following an appeal or if it isn't appealed against, then in each notice there's a period for compliance. Now with houses in multiple occupation, there is a longer than usual period for compliance, and this was discussed with members in the past over how we approach the impact of enforcement notices on tenants. and the members that we were liaising with at the time were clear, whilst they were really keen to see HMOs enforced against if they were unlawful, that they didn't want it to be too punitive on the tenants. So I think what happens is that we kind of find out what the tenancy agreement is with the current tenants and then tailor the period for compliance to match that, really, so that nobody is under particular pressure to be kind of evicted before the end of the tenancy agreement. So if the notices stand, then the period of compliance will run, and then at that point in time, planning enforcement will follow up to see if the notice has been complied with. If it has been complied with, then that's the result we want. You know, the breach will have ended, but the notice stays on the land. So obviously, if it reoccurred, then it would be an offence then to be in breach of the notice. If the notice isn't complied with, then the next step is to take the property owners to the magistrates' court and seek prosecution. So unfortunately, even at this stage of the process, enforcement is still quite a lengthy process and still has rights of appeal and things like that. But that's the system that we have to use. Hope that's helpful.
Did I see a hand on this side? No. Sorry. So we'll move to item 7, 8, public forum. All public forum statements submitted have been sent to members over a day ago. They have had full opportunity to read those. Obviously, I'm going to call those people who plan to be here to speak to their statement. Because the members have already read the statements, could you try to summarise in about 1 minute, please? And I'll call you by name. If you push much beyond a minute, I will actually ask you to conclude. So, but if you can try to keep it to 1 minute, I'd appreciate that, please. The first item is to do with the Iron Bridge, and the first person is Janet Poole. Janet? If you come to the centre, the mic in the centre should be on, so you just need to stand about probably 4 inches behind and speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. My name is Janet. I'm here to talk about the Iron Bridge in Kings Weston. 7 years ago, which is actually 365 weeks, 2,555 days ago, the bridge was damaged by a high-sided vehicle and hit twice since then. People in Bristol are tired of waiting for this much-loved bridge to be repaired and reopened. We understand the plans are not perfect. It's not going to suit everyone. It's not going to be accessible to everyone. But at this stage of the game, we just want the bridge repaired. We are really tired, we are fed up, we feel neglected, we feel forgotten, and we just do not know what else to do. We have protested, we have been on the news, we have been on the radio. Sorry, I'm getting a bit... Sorry. We have done everything we can to get this bridge done. And for the sake of my husband, who I've dragged to every protest, who've helped me with every letter, who's made every sign, who's done everything, please, 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 let's get this bridge reopened so people can use it. It's just not on, you know. It took 3 years to build the Titanic. It took 2 years to build the mole at Cribbs Causeway. 7 years and we've done nothing. And the first and one thing we wanted immediately were warning signs on all the approach roads. And do we have any? 0. From Henbury, from Sylvan Way, from Seymour's Road, there is not one warning sign saying don't come down.
Janet, I think we hear your passion over your plea, of course. Many thanks for your time. I then have Councillor Alexander Don can't be here, but members will have read his statement. I then have either Laura Welty, Gordon Richardson or David Redgewell. I did speak to David this afternoon and I don't believe that either of them can be here. So in which case I'll move to Ian Becky. No. So with that, can I invite Peter Westbury, the officer, to actually introduce the item in 5 minutes, of course. Peter?
Thank you, Chair. This is a report in respect of 2 applications, one for full planning permission and listed building consent for removal and reinstatement of King's Weston footbridge. You'll be very familiar with where this is. This is an application related to this bridge. This is the bridge before it was damaged, as is set out in the report. The details are that this is an application submitted by Bristol City Council. It's to dismantle the damaged footbridge in accordance with the provisional submitted method statement. This will enable repair off-site. The bridge will then be reinstalled 1.074 metres higher than its current level. There is a requirement for headroom of 5.49 metres to enable heavy goods vehicles to go under. And that's the reason for the application. That's the plans. I'll skip over that one because I think this is quite useful just to illustrate the change that is proposed. This is the bridge prior to the accident, and that is how the bridge will look if you are minded to approve this evening. So it will be raised by, and that will be the impact. The alteration will require the installation of steps. And that's just got to be a bit careful of these images, but that gives a rough idea of how it will look if you do approve. I want to concentrate just very quickly on equalities because that's a key issue. Clearly, in order to facilitate this alteration, it doesn't enable there to be access for all. We have to weigh up the heritage impact listed building versus assessing access for people for all. In weighing that up, I've relied on advice and guidance by Historic England. This is set out in your papers, but I just wanted to kind of underline that this is the advice that they give. We should aim to improve accessibility wherever practically possible, provided that work does not prejudice the character of the building to increase a long-term risk to long-term deterioration. So I've weighed up, if we leave it as it is, there's risk of further damage because there will be accidents. The proposal to increase the height, yes, it doesn't enable there to be access for people, for example, in wheelchairs, but nevertheless, I've taken that advice that the kind of preservation of the bridge overall means that we can recommend that this application be approved. So it is a recommendation to approve, Chair. There are conditions in respect of particularly method statement. You'll see that Historic England are particularly concerned about the funding for it. And while that kind of falls outside planning's remit, there is resolutions of, elsewhere within council work that allocates money for this. And accordingly, we recommend both planning permission for the full application and for the listed building consent. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Can I welcome belatedly Councillor Hussain? Faraz, good to see you. Obviously, under standing order, we've already started consideration of the first item, so unfortunately you can't participate in that. But of course, when we come to the Bedminster item, you can fully involve yourself in that. So questions to the case officer. Andrew?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, Peter. Just a quick question about accessibility. Obviously, it seems a bit perverse that we're spending or planning to spend a lot of money on restoring a structure and ends up being less accessible than it was previously. And I'm just wondering, why was the option of a ramp discounted? Is it a financial reason, or is it in terms of design? What are the reasons why a ramp couldn't be provided so we have access for people with buggies, people in wheelchairs, etc.?
If you notice, the red line doesn't include the kind of area required to facilitate a ramp. I think that's the main reason. I think that there are various options have been considered, the steepness of the ramp, but I think the application I had before me was steps. So I've assessed the steps primarily, and kind of weighed that up. I think it's to do with the extent of how far a ramp would need to go and the works involved.
Yeah. Can I also ask about, so if we are going to have the step option, obviously cyclists would still perhaps like to use that bridge. Is there a chance that we can have a rail for cyclists to push their bikes up the steps rather than have to lift and carry?
Equality, this is very much a footbridge. The advice I have from transport colleagues is that it could never be designed to be a cyclist's bridge because of separating pedestrians from cyclists in a safe way. So this has always been a footbridge. It's not designed to be for cyclists. So hence I haven't pushed for a kind of, some representations suggested a kind of, I don't know what you call it, but you do the kind of a track, you know, where you kind of on the steps, you have that kind of, and you can
push like a rail, exactly.
I didn't push for that very reason. This is very much a footbridge.
Yeah. But obviously I'm not suggesting that people would cycle over the bridge. I'm just saying that they'd be able to get their bikes up the steps more easily and then push it over the bridge and then down the other side. Like, you know, the banana bridge in the city centre has those rails where there are steps there.
Tom.
Thank you. Yeah, just following up on that, I do think that's a missed opportunity. I don't think anyone would be expecting anyone to cycle over the bridge, but certainly, you know, a lot of the comments have come in around accessibility, and it does seem like a missed opportunity. The question I had was about the height restrictors that Historic England referred to being put further along the carriageway to act as a sort of breaker before anything hit the bridge, and I just wondered if you could go into a bit more depth about why those weren't considered feasible for this site.
Chair, I think they fall outside the remit of this particular application. What I could do is add an advice note that the Transport Development Management to take away and that kind of signage should be added. It's not part of the planning application process to add highways signage further along the highway. That's the only reason. But it's something which can be minuted and we can take away and recommend, or if you see fit.
I did raise Tom's point at the agenda conference, so it does seem to me if members are minded to approve this, an advice note to that effect would be wise. Fee.
Ooh, can you hear me? The accessibility issue. I mean, this is an application by Bristol City Council, isn't it? So what kind of conversations could have... I mean, it's kind of too late now, but the ramp option does seem to me like a sensible one, because there's nothing preventing us from making an application on land that doesn't actually belong to the council. As I understand it, we can still, even if the land ownership isn't there, it just seems very... I can understand completely people who are reliant on wheeled transport, such as buggy users or wheelchair users, being quite disappointed the ramp option has been dismissed in a way that's not completely clear in the papers. I've got slightly less sympathy with the cyclists, I have to say, sorry, because I just think I can see bicycles causing absolute mayhem on that bridge, even if you're pushing them. But yeah, the ramp issue, can you just go into a bit more detail about that? Did you have a conversation with the highways officers about it, or the applicants with it? Because it was us.
I mean, if I can come in, I mean, I think it's just not realistic with the land that's available, and to be sympathetic with the listed bridge. There just isn't the space, I think, was the basic reason. And the other thing to bear in mind is at the moment there's no access, so it's a lot better than what's there at the moment. So we feel it's the best compromise, understanding all the frustrations. But we didn't think there was any other way, any other solution.
Paul?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just quickly, at the moment there are bars there to stop cycling onto the bridge anyway, aren't they? So, I mean, they look like they're going to be removed in the upcoming application. So, in a way, it's slightly more accessible than it was. Apart from the steps, obviously, but then modern bikes are generally very light, and if cyclists are, cycling up to them, I'm sure they can carry their bikes onto the bridge. And regarding the warning signs, really, considering that we're making the effort and following the highways guidance and moving it by a certain amount, I think we really should minute it and lobby that we need them to play their part and put some warning signs a bit further away from the bridge as well.
I'm sorry, Matthew.
If I could just come in on the warning signs, the point is they won't be needed if it's raised because it will be high enough that it doesn't need a warning. So if it gets permission, there wouldn't need to be a warning sign. It will be high enough that it's not needed.
Philippa?
I'm just picking up on the access point again. In the report, in the paragraph that was on the slide as well, it says, taking into account the views of Historic England and local access groups. And I just wondered if the local access groups have been consulted and what they said, please.
We consulted widely. I had initial comments back from various local groups. When I was preparing the report for this evening, chased final comments and didn't get anything. But I got the gist of where they were coming from, and I've included as much as I had. But yeah, we consulted widely on this application. I mean, it's worth noting, we just on terms of consultations, 97 consultation letters were sent out. The vast majority of the response I received was in support of this application. I think it's 39 in support. The two against were in respect of this equalities issue and access to all. And you'll see your amendment sheet. There was one that came in late in the day. But yeah, I did consult as far as I possibly could.
John?
I have a question around raising the bridge, in that, having walked under that bridge most of my life, the curb used to be almost a foot, and it's only my opinion that the reason this ended up being damaged is because the height of the road is slowly risen, and as you'll see, there's not a foot curb drop there anymore. So was it looked at to lower the road to its original level, therefore the bridge not needing to get hit? And is there anything that means that raising the bridge is going to be high enough? I noticed that they probably can't raise the road anymore, but you do have high-sided articulated trailers as well as the standard articulated trailer, so just around the height, really, and the road height.
Thank you, Chair. I can't help, I'm afraid, with the height of the road and what happened there, the proposal for the bridge, but my understanding is that to meet the required standard for vehicles going up beneath, it needs to be that, forgive me, sorry, the 5.49 metres, hence the raising of it by 1.074 metres. That's the standard. That's why that figure was arrived at. So I hope the road won't be raised. If it is, then we'll no doubt have another planning application and we'll be back here if all of a sudden vehicles can't get underneath. But at the moment, it meets the required standard for highways.
Matthew, do you want to add anything?
I'm not aware that the road lowering option was looked at, but I'd suggest it would be very expensive, particularly with a neighbouring junction. So I think it would be a very difficult scheme to deliver, and this is a more realistic proposition.
Could I just add then my call for the road, for the signage, because just because it might meet vehicles that are less than that height today doesn't mean that Amazon or somebody won't stuff more goods onto an even taller truck in the future. And on the basis that it's been hit multiple times, I think signage would be preventative if nothing else.
I think, Gary, I'm correct. that we could obviously petition or request Transport look at this, but we can't condition this, of course.
That's right, Chair. I can't add a condition that kind of adds to the scheme or changes the scheme. It could be, as it's the City Council's applicant, you could either just do it as part of the resolution to request consideration of signage, or at most put an advice note on.
Fine. Tom.
Thanks. Mine just comes back to the height again, and obviously I appreciate there are lots of comments in support of this, and I can understand why everyone definitely wants the bridge to be open. I don't know how many of them were calling for it to be raised specifically, but it just comes back to this about, it seems like we're using a planning solution to what's really a highways problem, and I just wanted to come back to this about Historics England saying that they would prefer the bridge to remain at its current level and height restrictors to be erected either side. Is that signage that they're referring to, those height restrictors, or is that something physical that would do the same job but be, you know, a highways thing rather than a planning thing?
I mean, I think what was suggested in the past was what would crudely be called goalposts, which, you know, would be very sort of ugly, and, you know, they'd get hit first. And I think we've never supported that as a solution. I'm not aware of it happening elsewhere, so it's not a solution we supported.
Fee. So, Ed.
I am going to go back to this accessibility thing. I've got two other questions as well, if that's okay. The best I can find that anything says is that it might cause harm to the registered park and garden to put in ramps. And I don't think that's a very thorough assessment, and I don't think this has been looked at enough. And I don't feel, so I'd like to know whether or not we've actually looked at that, because the best I can find is English Heritage saying it would likely cause some harm to the registered park and garden. It seemed to be the viewing platform and a wall. So has that been thoroughly assessed in view of the harm it would do to heritage? Because I don't think it's a planning matter. I think it's a heritage matter, and it's a balance, isn't it? And I don't feel that there's a thorough assessment of the harm it would do to the wall and the viewing platform.
Yes, thanks, Chair. On page 31 of the papers, under relevant planning applications, the second item listed refers to a previous application for the reinstatement of the footbridge. Now, and it says that was submitted, it was a 19 application that was withdrawn just over a year ago. Now, that application involved ramps, and so there was consultation with local groups, also local amenity groups, Historic England as well, and officers did have did assess that one. It was being the view coming back on that was that the harm to the historic landscape was quite significant as a result of that. Just the land take for the ramps to get a perfectly accessible crossing or perfectly accessible, access to the footbridge itself at this higher level would generate significant harm. And so I think on receipt of that advice, our transport colleagues who'd made the application withdrew the application. So as ever with a planning application, you're only looking at what's before you, and so we're not looking at one option or the other. But this is we've kind of been down this road because we've now got a proposal before us that involves raising the bridge and steps. But previously we had a proposal that didn't get as far as committee, and the applicants withdrew it, but involved the ramped options. And I think overall that planning balance, which everyone can strike, make their own judgment on, it was felt that the harm to heritage assets, i.e. the registered park and gardens there, was excessive. So I think it's fair to say that whilst a formal decision wasn't made on the ramped option, it was formally submitted and considered, and there was a lot of negative comments around it, really, and certainly planning officers weren't in a position to support it. So I think that's why we've now landed with a proposal with the steps, which we feel that, yeah, it does still cause harm. Obviously, it isn't fully accessible, but, on balance and in the circumstances, it's something that we can support.
Ed, your second question.
The second question is, Historic England suggests a number of Section 106 conditions should be applied. I think you might have said that it may be a bit out of scope of planning, but they've obviously carefully considered that. Is there any reason why we can't just lift and shift them and put them in as planning conditions?
I think their desire for a Section 106 relates to ensuring that the work is complete. And so I've worded the conditions, particularly in respect of the method statement, to say that to refer to completion of the work before that condition is discharged. There are issues about Section 106 because it's a Bristol City Council application and we can't have a legal agreement with ourselves. So it's the best I can do in terms of making sure that, once they dismantle, they put it back. It's just tied up in those planning conditions.
That's reassuring. Can I just question that? The planning authority can't make a deal with the highways authority?
It can't do a Section 106. It can do we could have a memorandum of understanding between the different parties, but you can't have a formal legal agreement. Sorry, just to clarify.
The last one is, this has been struck by several lorries. They're probably all insured. Have we done anything to try and recover money towards the cost of this from those lorries that have clearly disobeyed warning signs and gone on and caused immense amount of damage to a precious historic asset?
I'm really sorry. It's not a planning matter, I'm afraid. I have no answer to that one.
Can I suggest we now move to the debate, please? If I could just kick off, I must say I very much agree with Janet Poole that, frankly, I think it's appalling. This bridge, which I think to most people who are Bristolians, viewers, they know incredibly well, has been left unattended for 7 years. That's a huge, disgraceful time, and I'm sure in any other local authority in the country it would have been addressed far before now. So I welcome this application far belatedly, but I certainly welcome it. Secondly, may I be unusually personal, really, because I think it will help to address the context to the equalities arguments put about. As some of you may know, 12 years ago I had a fairly rare autoimmune condition, sickness, and for quite a number of months was paralysed. In fact, for a time I could only speak to my family by moving my eyelids up and down, of course. Eventually, I recovered as far as I think I will, but I do have some disabilities as a consequence. Realistically, I think overwhelmingly that's been a positive thing. It's certainly the experience for me. It's led to me looking at things with a new insight as a human being, and hopefully it's helped me actually be a better counsellor. And I certainly have always championed that we'd go our extra mile to make things more accessible to people in the disabled community and elsewhere. And I certainly appreciate the huge efforts organisations have made throughout the country to become more open to the needs of disabled people. But at the end of the day, not every facility can be adapted at the cost also, or the acceptable cost. In my view, frankly, almost any problem can be addressed by design ingenuity if money is not an issue. I know members here in Avonmouth and Lawrence Weston work very hard to get the £1 million in the budget in March of this year. Possibly, but not guaranteed, it could be a better bridge, more accessible if we spent 2 million, 3 million, 5 million. But let's be honest, within 2 months we have a very difficult budget round. We may have to save between 30 and 70 million quid from public frontline services. Can we honestly say, if that's the case, would we prioritise the Iron Bridge? And if not, surely it would be unattended and unimproved for another 7 years, another 14 years, perhaps 20 or 30 years. So I would say, I believe we've got a chance of making real progress. Let's go for it. Let's support this. I'll do that. Councillor Gita.
Yeah, I don't think the application's perfect, although I do welcome in the report, and thank you to Mr Westbury for the report, that it says it was brought to committee for the significance to the entire city, when last week at Mayor's Questions I was told it was a personal passion, a local passion project. But and I just want to address something on the accessibility with the points people have raised, and now's probably the right time to do it. The terrain on either side of the bridge is not accessible anyway. It's woodland, it's uneven ground. And so whilst I would love to see this more accessible for people who are less able to be able to use it, the terrain just doesn't allow it anyway. I would prefer to see it remain at the existing height. I'd prefer more investigation to go into lowering the road. But I don't think that's feasible from the conversations and the emails I've had with highways in the past because of the impact on the surrounding area. And I think on balance, this is probably the best solution for the money that the local area is going to get. So I'll be voting for it.
Paul.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for sharing that personal experience. Yeah, look, for the sake of Janet's husband, let's not come back here in another 365 weeks. I'm going to vote for this. It isn't perfect, but as Councillor Gita has said, you know, it's not particularly accessible at the moment. So, yeah, let's support this.
Ed.
Any permeability for walking is good. I think the cycling thing is an irrelevance. There is standard heights for bridges, so most of our motorways will adhere to those heights, so no lorries are going to go any higher because there's standard heights all over the country. So I don't think that's a problem. I'm disappointed that there wasn't more information for us to make a good decision, because I feel we should have had at least a thorough equalities impact assessment. I think we should have had a proper design against which we'd assess the harm to the historic environment, the viewing platform and the wall. And I think that would have been our due diligence to make sure that we had a proper information to go on. To hear, it's reassuring to hear that this was looked at in 2019 and discounted, but I think that could have been better dealt with. I had a very interesting history lesson, reading some excellent work by our urban design colleagues who are under threat, so I do hope that we respect that and found out all about Macadam and people who built the bridge. But it was in an effort to try and find the information I needed to make this decision. As part of that, I came across the fact that it's rough terrain anyway. I do think there's a very big difference between a single step and a chicane that we could move at any time and 12 steps. I've taken children to school in buggies, and that's a very big difference. So I think this was something that we really needed good information about, and I'm disappointed it wasn't there. But having said that, now I've heard the planning officer discuss with us, thank you, about previous things that have been withdrawn, then I'm willing to accept this.
Tom.
Yeah, just following on from what Ed said, really, thank you for the report. And it is reassuring for me to know that there was, the ramp was well considered back in 2019. Yeah, let's stop dithering and get the thing done.
Andrew.
Yeah, just wanted to add to that. You know, I am disappointed as well that we haven't been able to make the new bridge more accessible. As I say, it does seem rather perverse that we're spending a lot of money and we're making a structure less accessible than it was previously. But yeah, you know, the city has waited long enough, and you know, we can't afford to spend huge amounts of money on an iron bridge when there's a cost of living crisis. So I think the offer we've got is actually one that I'm going to accept. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Could I then formally move both approvals and add to those the advice note requesting the additional road signage Councillor Geeta's referred to? Do I have a seconder? Paul, thank you. Can I have a name vote? Fee? Tom?
4.
Ed? Andrew?
4.
John?
4.
Paul? Philippa?
4.
And I'll vote for, so it's unanimously granted. Thank you. Join us. We'll have a very brief cast change. While the officers coming to the podium, could I invite the public forum statement submitters to come and summarise their statement? As I said before, all members have actually read each one. So if you could summarise in about 1 minute, please. Go to the central mic. It is switched on, so you just need to speak to us. The first person is Markham Bramall. Markham. Right. So the second was, and who isn't there, Councillor Bradshaw. He's not, he said he might not make it, but members will read his concerns and comments. David Fitter.
Good evening, councillors. I believe that this development of managed student accommodation will help rejuvenate West Street with a beautiful building and greater footfall in local business. It's on our first development at Bedminster. In 2020, we brought the derelict Princess of Wales back to life, which received wide praise on the local Then and Now Facebook group. For this development, we're proposing to use a modern method of construction that reduces delivery time by half and reduces CO2 emissions during construction by 40% versus traditional build. We also support the local council's proposal to employ apprentices from Hengrove's Construction Centre to learn this MMC technique. Clearly, there is demand for more student accommodation in the area. Landlords are already flipping traditional family homes into student HMOs to meet demand permeating from the centre. In just 2 years, this has happened on nearby Bartlett Road, Palmyra Road, Breach Road, West Street, Stanley Street and Beaufort Street. The trend is clear, and it's clear where it will go. Bedminster is in an Article 4 area, so developments such as this will give Bristol planning the opportunity to reject HMO conversions. Approval of this development will therefore help safeguard against future loss of traditional housing stock in the local area. Thank you.
Thank you, David. John Cocking. John?
In response to concerns raised at the previous committee regarding the location of the site, it's important to note that policy DM2 supports student accommodation outside the city centre, where it addresses the relevant residential amenity and concentration criteria, which this proposal does. It's also relevant that a large proportion of university and college teaching facilities can be reached in 10 to 20 minutes from the site via bus or bike, including UWE Bauer Ashton, Boom Satsuma University of Law, UOB Temple Quarter, City of Bristol College, BIM and UOB Woodland Road. In addition, the proposal will deliver a wide range of benefits, including a design enhancement to West Street, increased spending in local shops, meeting student demand without losing family housing, biodiversity and energy enhancements, and a SIL contribution of just under £139,000 payable to the council. The proposal also has the support of the Labour Ward Councillor Mark Bradshaw. Thank you very much.
Right. And Stephen Wickham.
Regardless of appearances, the BS3 planning group object to the student element of the application, which is considerably detached geographically from actual campuses and seems from this and similar applications simply the best paying option for any spot on a bus route, regardless of local context. Redevelopment of the Paramount site is supportable in principle, but we would far rather see family homes here, perhaps mixed living spaces, apartments and houses for individuals, couples and families. I drove past with my wife today and she couldn't believe that that was being effectively considered as a hall of residence. As a matter of further comment on West Street, we think too much is made of the M1 bus route, much as we'd like to see it fully utilised. It is just one linear provision, and one might, with everybody who's chipping in saying that their sustainable site because of it is, one might expect to envisage a 1-minute service being required in drive time to fulfil this demand, and we simply don't believe that it will be provided, even that if those that do run are hopefully full. So we begin to think the Metrobus name is taken far too lightly by developers. We don't think that this proliferation of students up West Street is a good idea at all for the local community.
Thank you, Stephen.
That's it. Cheers.
So can I move to the case officer? Matthew, you've got 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So this application concerns 155 to 165 West Street, as you've heard. The proposal includes demolition of all existing buildings at the site, which includes a vacant vehicle repair workshop and a car showroom. The proposal would deliver 82 square metres of employment floor space to mitigate the loss of the existing floor space. As well as that, 19 student flats are proposed, 12 are studio flats and 7 are cluster flats, which provides them a total of 49 bed spaces. So the application was initially heard at committee in November, but was deferred to this committee in order for officers to further report on the suitability of the student accommodation at this location, which is included within the committee report. The location of the development is also a concern of neighbours, albeit their principal concern relates to the capacity of existing roads to absorb the car parking associated with its development. So here's an aerial of the site. I won't dwell on that too much as you've seen it before. The site is within a 10-minute walk of both North Street and East Street, a 5-minute walk of Parsons Street railway station and the Metro bus stop, as you've heard. And as well as that, there's well-served bus stops on West Street. So the site is formerly or previously developed land in an accessible location, meaning there is a strong policy expectation to develop sites like these. In terms of the location, as you've heard, the key policy is DM2. It does permit student accommodation outside of the city centre, provided it meets the general criteria, which expects proposals to not create or contribute to a harmful concentration of such uses in the area. The development would not result in a harmful concentration of students in the locality, and nor would it reduce or remove existing family-sized homes in the area. Rather, it would reduce pressure on family-sized homes from potential conversion to HMOs, as well as delivering much-needed student homes. 2 parking spaces are proposed, as well as a car club space in the locality. Transport Development Management has reviewed the submitted parking survey, which suggests there is availability within the neighbouring streets to meet the on-street car parking demand from this development. As well as that, a travel plan will be secured by condition, and all in all, Transport Development Management raised no objection. The development is not expected to harm neighbours' amenity, and a management plan is advised to be secured by condition in the interest of minimising disturbance to neighbours. As such, the proposal meets the general criteria of policy DM2, meaning the development's location is acceptable. We advise against comparing this development to, for example, family-sized homes on the site, as the assessment should be limited to the development plan policies only and other relevant material considerations, and in this case, the proposal conforms with all relevant policies. I'll just quickly run through the plans. The development's arranged over 2 blocks. Block A is on the left and includes the ground floor employment use, as well as 2 wheelchair accessible studios. The 2 parking spaces as well are adjacent to Block A. Here's the second floor and roof plans. You can see the photovoltaic panels on the roof and the air source heat pumps, as well as the landscaped areas. Here's the elevations. Overall, we find the design is consistent with other examples in the area and will actually improve and enhance the condition of the site. Here's some further elevations. So in terms of our recommendation, as you know, the council's, due to the council's housing supply issues, national policy has imposed a presumption in favour of approving sustainable development, unless the adverse impacts of doing so will significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. In this case, there are no significant or demonstrable harms associated with approving this application, but there are a number of benefits to which weight should be attached. These include the proposal's contribution to Bristol's 5-year housing land supply, the provision of needed student accommodation, the redevelopment of a brownfield site and the enhancement of the character of the area, the sustainability credentials of the proposal, including a delivery of a biodiversity net gain at the site, the employment floor space proposed, and the civil payment of over £138,000. So as such, we are recommending the application is approved, subject to conditions and a Section 106 agreement, which will secure money for a TRO, which will facilitate the car club within the locality. Delegated authority is sought to secure the Section 106.
Thank you, Matthew. Are there any questions for the case officer? Tom?
Yeah, I just had a question about affordability. Obviously, if this were used for housing, we have a policy about providing affordable housing. Do we have anything similar about providing affordable rent student accommodation?
Not at this time. The local plan review is, however, looking at that.
Yeah. Paul?
Just a quick question, and I don't know whether you'll be able to answer it or not. In their statement, I believe West Street BS3 neighbourhood group said they weren't involved in the original consultation. Is that something that is the fault of the developer or the fault of us?
I can only comment on the application itself. We consult neighbourhood groups like the Old Market Group, who are a designated neighbourhood forum, whereas other interest groups are more of a self-serve basis. So that's why they weren't notified.
Philippa?
I've just got a question about the energy. The solar panels, it looks as though they've got 3.24 kilowatts, which sort of is about the same as an average domestic house that has solar panels has that. So, run a few fridges, but that'd be it. I'm just wondering why there aren't more. It looks like it's quite a large area of flat roof, and I'm not quite sure why there couldn't be more solar panels on there to further improve the whatever it's called, the improved, the energy, carbon dioxide reduction.
So the target in policy is 20%. With the air source heat pumps and the photovoltaic panels, they're delivering a 38.4% reduction. So they do meet that policy. So it would be unreasonable for us to push for a higher standard. Obviously, we encourage it, but we couldn't resist the development on those grounds. And should the developer want to, they can obviously install more panels.
Ed?
2 questions, if I may, Chair. First one is, if you can go to your presentation slide 7, which has got the frontages. Just wondering, the frontages on West Street itself, the one on the left looks great, looks like shops, it looks like it's going to be active. The one on the right doesn't look active to me, and it's basically got a bin store and a couple of windows. If we were considering this as just that frontage, would that be considered an active frontage and acceptable within policy?
So you are right, yeah, the Block A has more active frontage. Block B on the right-hand side, so there's a chamfered corner with the lobby area for the, for where the students can meet, and there'll be also management on site. So I think if you're approaching from the north-east walking towards it, you would perceive it as a more active frontage. Possibly not so much from the other way. My screen's not working here, so I can't point, but the the far right ground floor window is to a lounge area, so that will provide a degree of an active frontage. A bin store is more perhaps a request from the Bristol Waste Company to have the most easily accessible waste store, but the policy expectation for active frontages is less on areas outside of primary or secondary shopping areas, like your typical high street area, like, I don't know, parts of Gloucester Road, etc. So they have done enough here to provide enough of an active frontage to meet the design expectations for ground floor active frontages.
And there's a comment in the report that this is adaptable in the future. And I was just wondering, particularly with modern methods of construction, are we convinced that that is true, and that if at some point in the future this could be repurposed for other forms of accommodation?
It's adaptable insofar as the majority of the rooms would meet the HMO space standards, which is the closest real standard we have. I mean, I'm sure they could be converted into a typical, residential flat. But I'm not qualified to comment on the construction side of it, unfortunately.
Andrew.
Yeah, just a question about space standard. Am I right? I think I read somewhere that there isn't a space standard for student accommodation. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So obviously it's not really a question about this particular application, but is that something that perhaps we might be looking at in our local plan? Or is it a national question? Why isn't there a space standard for students? Seems rather unfair.
I think it is something that will come through in order to require such a standard to be met, because space standards, they're national standards, so we've got good basis for that for conventional residential development. Student accommodation, less so, albeit if any particular development wants to partner with the university, then the university also do their own quality control over that. But that isn't a guarantee, of course. So any kind of new student space standard would have to come through new policy. I know there was a draft SPD on student accommodation. I understand that may not be progressing because it's just opened up a lot of significant issues that are probably more appropriately going to be dealt with through the new local plan. So I think, unfortunately, like a number of issues in terms of raising the bar on that kind of issue, it's a kind of a local plan thing. And the full, I know there's a consultation underway at the moment on certain aspects of the local plan, but the full draft local plan consultation, I understand, will be next year.
Let's move to determination. Obviously, sorry, Paul. Right. Last month, I raised some concerns about this, and hence the deferral. So I feel justified in commenting on that. In my view, it's been beneficial because the report we received this evening, in my view, in context is more powerful and supports this application more, where I did question before the context of the report. So in terms of the usage in this location, it seems to be more supportable. Secondly, I've used that time more to explore more of this application, including speaking to the ward councillors and other stakeholders. And it does seem the applicant has worked hard with them and came up with a scheme which responds to the context here. Obviously, it was a former garage site, so there's some remediation to deal with. Obviously, the applicant also has made quite a success of the conversion of the Princess of Wales pub nearby. And we've heard from them that there are upbeat, positive, progressive design proposals as part of this package. So I'm much more actually mollified than I was before. And in my view, this application deserves support. Paul?
Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. And I'm really sorry to be disagreeable this close to Christmas, but on this particular occasion, I'm going to have to disagree with yourself and the officers. I don't think under policy DM2 it's convinced me that the levels of on-street parking can be reasonably accommodated. I don't think the levels of activity that cause excessive noise can be confidently dismissed. We've got 3 local groups objecting to it. We've got 7 times as many objections as gestures of support. And I think that the developers have been invited to consider possibly a mixed development, which I think would fit in much more with the area. I know it very well, and as I probably said last time, my favourite kebab shop and my favourite curry house are virtually next door, and they're not threatened by this application, so I don't think I have to register an interest. But yeah, I'll be voting against it.
Could I ask Paul Matthew to respond to your main concerns, if he can?
Yep, sure. With regards to on-street parking, they did do a parking survey which found capacity for about 21 spaces, and TDM expect at the highest sort of estimate to be 15 cars from this development. So on that basis, they suggest that there is capacity, but I must say that I really had to push transport for that estimate, and they said that is an upper level. In terms of noise, they've provided a really good management plan, which it's clear that it looks like it's been employed elsewhere. There will be 24/7 contact line for serious incidents, on-site presence throughout the week as well. So I think they've done all they really can in that regard. I think that was all of your concerns.
I'm presuming the traffic survey was done during the day, because during the day the streets are pretty empty. At night, the area is... I've got friends in the area that have to park 3, 4, 5 streets away from their house already. So a daytime traffic survey to me is not great, because the students are going to be living there. They're going to be leaving their cars there at night. And I think that is the real issue. But that's just my opinion.
Tom?
Thanks. I kind of regret putting my hand up now because I'm a bit unsure again after Paul's comments there. I think what this application highlights to me is that there's clearly a problem with endless university expansion, and it tickles me when developers come to us and say, we're building student accommodation to help with the housing crisis. The housing crisis we've got is that there aren't enough family and affordable homes. If you want to help build family and affordable homes, don't come and build student accommodation. But obviously we don't have policies that can deal with that at the moment. So I think it's okay. It's average. Would it stand up to would they allow this in Clifton test? Almost definitely not. But given that we're quite limited in policy terms, I think I probably will have to vote for this.
Ed?
I think on balance this is policy compliant. It's an improvement on the existing buildings. It's a reasonably sympathetic design, which is in line with the local kind of buildings. I think there's clear evidence that a lack of student accommodation can affect housing availability across the city, and I think that this is therefore justified. And I think it's also good that we're not having an over-concentration of student accommodation in certain areas, and dispersing it across the city is quite a good thing. I think we have to trust the parking surveys. I think all the evidence is that young people are giving up cars massively and seeing them as a burden, not as an opportunity. I think that there are maybe existing parking problems. I was thinking that actually the survey wasn't done when Ashton Gate was hosting a home match, because that's when you really have parking problems in this area. One of the concerns you mentioned before, Richard, was that student accommodation pays zero council tax, and I think that's of great concern, and I think it'd be great if you could take that up with your members of your own party or in government, and we could try and change that, because we are seeing a huge amount of student accommodation. They're not giving anything back in terms of rates to this city, and we do have pressure on our infrastructure. I'm frankly slightly astonished to hear Paul talking about the number of objections to this when we've had very strong objections to things in the past, and that hasn't bothered you, Paul.
All I would say, Councillor Powden, is I think you're being rather optimistic to imagine any national government or whatever political colour listens to its poor bloody infantrymen at the front. Fee?
I think you undersell yourself, Councillor Reddy. I think I appreciate that some of the local residents aren't happy with this, and I appreciate some of the points that Paul was making about the number of objections, but this is not in itself a democratic process. What we're here to do is not to reflect the views of local people, possibly, which again the Clifton argument comes in there, so it's possibly a good thing. We're here to make sure that planning policy is upheld, and this meets planning policy as far as I can see. I'd also say as an aside, I mean, my ward has got absolutely shed loads of students in it, and far fewer students actually drive than you think. They don't find it a very attractive option, they haven't got that much money. Students who play a lot of rugby and veterinary students who've got to go out to the vet school, they drive, but generally speaking they don't drive as much as you think, frankly. So I'll be voting for it.
John?
I share the frustration about the housing problems in the area. And I think I said at the last meeting, I don't buy the argument that building student accommodation frees up houses, because HMO landlords aren't all of a sudden going to say, oh, I can make this a family home now. But I do concede that it will probably stop more HMOs being created. I think it's in the wrong area, personally, but on the basis that it could be adaptable back to HMOs or some kind of accommodation for working people, and it's policy compliant, I'll be voting for it.
Andrew?
Thank you, Chairman. Just as a flippant aside, I think, Paul, your favourite kebab shop and curry house would do rather well having a lot of students on their doorsteps, so they must be rubbing their hands in glee. But yeah, when we heard about this case previously, I think my main concern was the one of location. Is it a suitable location for student housing? But I think the report has sort of placated me, you know, looking at the travel time survey, access to sustainable transport, public transport, I think is absolutely fine. And, you know, obviously we may wish for a different scheme, a scheme with a different mix of housing, but that isn't before us, and we have to judge this scheme on its merits. And I think, as others have said, it's planning policy compliant, and I will be voting for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Philippa?
Yes, I mean, I agree that it's policy compliant, and so I'm sorry, I will be voting for it. I do think it would be really good if we could encourage people to do the maximum they can in terms of energy efficiency, and I would strongly encourage the developer, if this passes today, to put some more solar panels on the roof, you know, double, triple, quadruple it, to make a meaningful difference. It's, you know, that's going to sort of run 5-6 fridges or something. Thank you.
Could I formally move the approval? Is there a seconder? Thank you, Andrew. Can I do a name vote as normal? Tom?
For.
V?
For.
Ed?
For.
Andrew?
For.
John?
For.
Farah? For.
Against.
Philippa?
For.
And I'll vote for, so it's overwhelmingly approved. Can I thank you for your attendance? Obviously, this is the last meeting this year. The next meeting is the 1st February next year. Can I wish you all have a happy Christmas, and hopefully after the pretty awful year we've had, and probably 2 years before that, a happy new year. Thank you.